Hello and welcome to this series on preparing for the last days. And I have something to say right now that almost doesn't seem like, does it really belong in here? It's prepare by taking on humility. Wait a minute, do we need to be taking on ammunition? Don't we need prayer and fasting? Well, indeed we do. We need to prepare for calamities in every possible way. We need to be prepared with physical things. We need to be prepared spiritually. And humility is one of those preparations we're just going to have. God gives his grace to the humble. That means divine help, that's what grace is. Mercy and divine help is given to those who have that measure of humility that the Lord calls humility. It's not what we call piously or I'm being humble. No, it has nothing to do with our assessment of ourselves and everything to do with how God assesses us in any given situation. Humility, like pride, it's very difficult to see in ourselves. If we actually think we're humble, we may be lifted up in pride by that very thought. And so pride is difficult to see. I'd written this down. Pride is the impulse to put our own needs ahead of others. And that's our default position, isn't it? And it's the impulse to trust ourselves rather than the Lord. Again, another default position for the heart. It's the impulse to draw confidence from our knowledge and our strength. Well, that's exactly where I want to draw my confidence from. But knowledge is going to puff up. Strengths build us up in pride about our own strength and abilities. And so these are countervailing. They work against us, even though they also work for us. Because if they're building us up into pride, it is well known from Proverbs and from observing the terrible career of the enemy that pride goes before a fall. Pride trips us up. Pride is not our friend, but pride is that unrecognized locus of evil on the inside where self takes charge. I was saying to one of our guys at the mission today, coming out of drugs and alcohol, that, it's not enough to just get the alcoholism or the drugs out of a person, or even to get the actual sinful things out of a person. Because if you leave self in charge, you're still letting a sinner be in charge of a sinner. If I'm leaving self in charge of me, that's pride disguised as me. That's the enemy's kingdom disguised as me. And if I'm leaving self in charge of me, how can I possibly advance the kingdom of God? In fact, Jesus said you can't. He said, excuse me, if you want to walk with him, we've got to be willing to deny self. We've got to take self off the throne. It can't be about me. It can't be about what I want and what I need and what I have to have and what I think about this and what I think about that. It's got to become, the questions all have to change. It's got to become, what does Jesus want for me? What does God want for me? How do they want me to handle this? What do they want me to think about this? How do they want me to go through this? It's just got to shift. And that for that shift to happen, we're going to need something that pride doesn't want to have. Ironically, our weaknesses are one of the things that pride in us finds the greatest fault with. And yet they are among our best tutors and helpers. It's out of our weaknesses that most of us came to Christ. It's out of our failures that most of us turned to the Lord and started listening to him for wisdom. It's out of weakness, out of ignorance, it's out of brokenness, it's out of all of these things that God brings the grace in that helps us to rise up to live by his life. And it's out of our strengths and abilities that we pulled away from Jesus in the first place. Didn't really want to go near him as long as we felt our oats and could run in our own strength. And so, although it doesn't seem this way, our weaknesses are our friends and we need to shake hands with them. If we want to walk in humility, drawing on grace, then we need to humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord, as Paul did in Corinthians. I don't know if I've got that passage right here. Oh, yes. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. But Jesus said to me, this is Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, Paul said, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I'm strong. Does he mean he's strong in himself? No, he's strong at trusting the Lord, at listening to him, at doing what Jesus would desire, because I realize I can't get through this without him. So my weaknesses unite me to Christ in a way that my strengths never do. And if we want to take on humility, then that's going to mean taking a whole new look at what you've had as weaknesses inside of you in a despise category. And that's pride. As long as you despise yourself for your weaknesses, despise the weaknesses inside yourself, you'll despise other people for those same weaknesses. And that's surely pride. But if you see the Lord isn't holding these things against you, he has compassion for you and me because he knows that they grew in us out of brokenness and they grew in us out of ignorance. He's not holding that against us, but he uses it beautifully to keep us united to him. So the sight of my weaknesses and my foolishness and my ignorance and my arrogance, the sight of all of these things that I wish I didn't have, the sight of it makes me turn to the Lord and want to hang on to him and say, God, you've got to guide me through this, because prayer is our best friend. And God, guide me through this, forgive me, lead me, keep me close to you, show me my next step. That's the safest position you could possibly be in. We need to take on humility in order to walk into the days ahead. And for that, our weaknesses will work to keep us humble. That's their good work that they do on the inside of us. And I hope you discover how helpful that can be. Not that we want to wallow in our weaknesses, or not that we want to just pursue our weaknesses and our faults. Not that at all. But the sight of them is a reminder to take on humility and start praying to the Lord for his help. What does the Lord require of us? But to love, mercy, to do justice, and to walk humbly with our God. And so I hope you'll be able to practice this now and into the days ahead. And I'll see you for the next lesson.